In Amtrak's history, it has used many different names for its passenger trains, from short corridor trains to long-distance routes, some being classic household names before Amtrak's existence, and some that Amtrak created in its time. Still, many names have fallen by the wayside from 1971 to today, and that's what we're going to do in this production. This is the top 12 discontinued Amtrak train names. Number 12. The Silver Palm. I'm sure many of you know this train from the late 90s to early 2000s when it replaced the Palmetto, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But just over a decade before it was part of Amtrak's long-distance group, Silver Palm was a simple Miami to Tampa, Florida interstate train, which started on November 21st, 1982. The service traveled over seaboard system trackage and was the first interstate train to utilize Amfleet 2 coaches. The train had been subsidized by the Florida Department of Transportation, but after a 2-year trial, the FDOT looked to end the subsidiaries for the train, seeing in October 1984 that the Silver Palm's fare box ratio was of 45.3%, almost 15% less of the state law requiring for state-sponsored services to maintain and keep funding. This didn't please the Florida Coalition of Rail Passengers, who sued on the argument that the Florida Department of Transportation had calculated the operating ratio incorrectly. They did win at district court level, but unfortunately, the Florida First District Court of Appeal overturned the decision by appeal in late March of 1985. Then, a month later, on April 30th, the Silver Palm was no more. For that time period. Fast forward to the mid-90s, after Amtrak had to discontinue the Palmetto, they got their third Florida train again in November of 1996 and named it the Silver Palm. The train ran from New York down the Palmetto's route to Savannah and to Jacksonville, followed by traveling down the former Seaboard Airlines S-Line through Wildwood to Tampa, bypassing Orlando in the process, and then continued to Miami. The train was equipped with full dining and sleeping service, but even though it lasted longer than the original Silver Palm, when the sleepers and dining car were pulled in May 2002, the name Silver Palm went back into the pages of history, replacing the Palmetto, which replaced it on the current Amtrak system. Number 11. The Gulf Breeze. This was a section off the New York-New Orleans Crescent, and a short section at that. But regardless, this train cut off from the Crescent at Birmingham, Alabama, and ran as far south as Mobile, Alabama, to serve the communities in Alabama including Montgomery and Atmore, starting on October 27, 1989. However, this train was swept up by a cost-cutting measure in 1995. On April 1st of 95, the final train ran and would be replaced by bus service. Though it was not lost for the Gulf Breeze name yet, that same year, an attempt was made to use the name for service along the Sunset Limited's route between Mobile and New Orleans. This became known as the Gulf Coast Limited, which started in June of 1996, and while the train had proved to be popular, state money would not be forthcoming to the service, and the Gulf Breeze died away. Number 10. The Floridian and Kentucky Cardinal. These two are together. Even though one is a longer route than the other, they did share a part of the route. First off, the Floridian, successor to the South Wind, a joint train that was first run by the Pennsylvania Railroad, the Louisville and Nashville, the Atlantic Coastline, which later would become the Seaboard Coastline, and the Florida East Coast Railway. The Floridian was augmented on November 14, 1971, running from Chicago through Louisville, Kentucky, east to Nashville, and down to Birmingham and to Jacksonville, Florida, where the train would split into two routes, one section to Orlando, Tampa, and St. Petersburg, and the other section running through to Wildwood, Florida, and then further south to Winter Haven, West Palm Beach, and Miami. This train, though, would run into many problems, including deteriorated track work from PRR's successor Penn Central, and the new SDP-40Fs that Amtrak got in the 70s didn't do any better with derailments on the PC and LNN trackage. A brief stint with the Louisville section of the original auto train did not help things. The Floridian was discontinued on October 9, 1979. Since then, Amtrak has never had a direct Chicago to Florida train. Then in late 1999 came the Kentucky Cardinal that took over the Hoosier States route running from Chicago to Indianapolis, then south to Jeffersonville, Indiana, just on the other side of the Ohio River from Louisville, as a daily train. However, this train was quite an unlucky train. Bad business decisions by trying to use this train to carry mail, coupled with the inadequate departure times as well as bad track conditions, would lead to the train's demise. Case in point, while the distance from Indianapolis to Jeffersonville and later Louisville to be closer into the Kentucky area wasn't far off, it took the train 6 hours to traverse 116 miles roughly between Indianapolis and Jeffersonville and Louisville, mainly because of the 30-mile-per-hour jointed rail track of the host railroad Louisville and Indiana Railroad, making it in total a 12-hour journey, much slower than driving on the interstate from Chicago to Louisville. Rail advocates tried to get the service extended to Nashville, but when the mail contract vanished, the Kentucky Cardinal flew off the timetable for good. The last trains departed on July 4th weekend, 2003. A real pity, as many believe with more common sense the train could have been successful. Some considering Nashville would have provided the ridership to keep the train afloat. Number 9. The Night Owl and Twilight Shoreliner. These two stand out together in the spot as being the only overnight passenger trains that ply the Northeast Corridor at night. While Amtrak didn't pick up the Penn Central's Federal Express, it did begin the overnight service back in 1972 with the Night Owl, and started as trains 168 and 169. But those numbers soon became 66 and 67, running between Washington, D.C. and Boston, carrying coaches, sleeper cars, and a buffet lounge sleeper before receiving Amfleet equipment in 1977. One interesting concept the Night Owl had was a set-out sleeper used at New York Penn Station, where southbound passengers could board at 9:30 p.m., just over 6 hours before the southbound train arrived, to pick up the car. A similar practice was used on the northbound train, which dropped the sleeper off at Penn Station, and passengers could remain on the sleeper until about 8:30 a.m. in this service known as Executive Sleeper from 1984 to 1994, ended because of equipment shortages. By 1997, the equipment for the train was outdated and losses were high. The Night Owl last ran on July 10, 1997, which then became the Twilight Shoreliner. This train retained 66 and 67 and replaced the Heritage fleet with Viewliner sleepers. It also featured a custom class coach and special Twilight Cafe, which provided hot meals restricted to sleeping car and custom class passengers. In addition, Amtrak extended the train's southern terminus from Washington to Newport News, Virginia. However, cutbacks in 2001 saw the train lose its custom class and Twilight Cafe car. 2 years later, Twilight Shoreliner was replaced by the Federal, and not long afterwards, the sleeper car disappeared from the train. Today, Federal has been dropped from 66 and 67, and only a baggage car bears any resemblance to both trains of the past. But it might gain that charm back, as talk has gone around about sleepers returning, probably when the new Viewliner 2 sleepers are built. Number 8. The Cape Codder. One of the more unusual trains that Amtrak ever ran in being a seasonal train running only in the summer and during the weekends. The train ran from New York City up the Northeast Corridor to Providence, where it split off at Attleboro, Massachusetts, then headed to its destination of Hyannis. Started in 1986, the service originally saw 2 trains running in each direction, an eastbound on Friday evening and Saturday morning, and a westbound on Saturday and Sunday afternoons. In 1988, connections were established with the tourist railroad, the Cape Codder in Hyannis, for transferring passengers off Amtrak at Attleboro, thus providing daily service to Cape Cod. This only lasted a year, as the CC&H folded in 1989, and at the same time, the Saturday trains were done away, which left only the Friday and Sunday trains operating to the Cape. This service, while popular, had drawbacks. First was the limited schedule, and the second was the limited access passengers had on the Cape without an automobile. Even changing the route starting from Boston and running down to Attleboro didn't fare better in 1996. That would be the last year the Cape Codder would roll, and left Cape Cod without train service. That is until 2013. Today, the Cape Flyer running along the old colony lines from Boston and picking up the Cape Codder's route in Middleborough proceeds to Hyannis, with stops in Wareham and Buzzards Bay. Whereas today, sturdy bus connections and conveniences help complement the Cape Flyer, which could have helped the Cape Codder. But that's just a fact. Number 7. The North Coast Hiawatha. One of the more earlier long-distance routes that many of you probably know, but also didn't last a decade in Amtrak's existence. This train, though, came about due to Amtrak choosing not to run Northern Pacific train routes, causing concern in Montana to State Senator Mike Mansfield, pointing out the Empire Builder, which had been retained, bypassed Montana's major population centers. Finally cracking under Mansfield's pressure, a new service came in June of '71, nicknamed also the Mike Mansfield Express. The train ran tri-weekly from Chicago to Spokane, where it combined with the Empire Builder to Seattle. On the other 4 days, the train terminated in Minneapolis. This joint operation lasted only 2 years, when they extended the train service on its own to Seattle. Interestingly, while the North Coast Hiawatha name traveled to Seattle, the name Hiawatha was used for the train only running the 4 days between Minneapolis and Chicago, but later renamed Twin Cities Hiawatha in 1972, and that only ran 2 years when the North Coast Hiawatha became a daily train. The train's main route ran the route of the Empire Builder to Minneapolis before splitting for a route to serve St. Cloud, Staples, and Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, before reconnecting the Empire Builder route in Fargo, North Dakota. Then the train ran a different route before it would rejoin the Builder route at Sandpoint, Idaho. Among the towns served on this portion of the route would include Bismarck, North Dakota, Billings, Montana, Bozeman, and Missoula. I did say daily service started in 1974, but daily service would run during the summer season only, and then reverted back to tri-weekly service west of Minneapolis. Though the train did run daily for a month during the holiday season of December 1975. The train almost was discontinued early in 1976 with other services, but a past Congress budget kept the train going for the moment. But its downfall, unfortunately, wouldn't be far off in the distance. In 1977, a new schedule had the train running its route in 52.5 hours due to speed restrictions imposed on the same type of locomotive that plagued the Floridian with derailments, the SDP-40F. Eventually, the train would be reverted back to a full tri-weekly train, and although the schedule was greatly reduced to just under 47 hours thanks to the F-40s arriving on the railroad, it wasn't enough to save the route. On October 6, 1979, the North Coast Hiawatha departed from both Seattle and Chicago, and when they each arrived at their respective destinations, they became another victim in Amtrak routes swept up in 1979. Interesting note that this train had been proposed to run with superliners, supposedly the second train to be equipped so behind the Empire Builder, but it didn't run long enough to experience it. Many attempts over the last decades have been made to revive the service through southern Montana and North Dakota. However, none of them have been successful, stalling out in one way or another.